Thank you. So Ryan, you want to put everybody can put your mics
Yes,
on
ma'am.
so we can all hear each other. Sure can. Welcome everyone to the morning workshop. This is a very exciting topic that we're going to be talking about. This is the public safety system transformation. We've been talking a lot about the transformational work that Ramsey County is doing, and I know that this system, which is a cross-departmental team, has been really leading on so many of these, on so many of this work. So this morning's workshop is an overview of a framework for transforming the public safety system. It's a culmination of work being done over the last several years, and it's redefining public safety with our community partners to center this system around investing in the well-being and wellness of Black and American Indian communities. So we do have a cross-departmental team to share this framework with us and engage in a discussion with us. But first of all, we're going to go around and we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So Mary Jo McGuire, County Commissioner, District 2.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
Trista Castillo, District 3.
Jim McDonough, District 6.
Rafael Ortega, District 5.
Kathy Hadeen, Deputy County Manager for Health and Wellness Service Team.
Jen Hamrick, Senior Policy Analyst.
Leah Bauer, Research and Evaluation Supervisor for Community Corrections.
Chris Coulter, Planning and Evaluation Analyst at Community Corrections.
Victoria Reinhardt, County Commissioner, District 7.
Tony Carter, County Commissioner, District 4.
Scott Williams, Deputy County Manager for the Safety and Justice Service Team.
Excellent. And I know we have people, I don't know if we have a lot of people online, but I'd like at least the people in the room to introduce themselves. So do you want to introduce yourself over there? Great.
Lisa D, County Managers, Admin Support.
Great.
Me.
Okay.
Rich Stevens, Planner, Office of Safety and Justice.
Great.
Melissa Finnegan, Government Relations.
Charlie Bartlett, citizen of St. Paul.
Great. Welcome. Okay, thank you all. I appreciate that. And so thanks again to the team that's going to present here, Kathy Hadeen, Scott Williams, Jen Hamrick, Leah Bauer, and Chris Coulter. And with that, we're going to let Jen Hamrick start us off. We've been asked if we can hold our questions till after the presentation because the presentation builds on each other. So as much as you're able to, we'll let them do their half-hour presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair McGuire. Commissioners, we're really excited to be here to share this framework with you. So as an organization, we have been working together for a long time around public safety and justice reform and transformation. We are hoping that today's discussion talks a bit about our journey, but also, and more importantly, calls out where we are now and where we plan to move in the future. The folks here today are leading this work from different perspectives, representing key sponsorship, coordination capacity, and data and research leadership, driving the core framework behind this strategy. Here's the overview of how we'll spend our time together today. First, we'll start with the purpose and the background to really shed light on what is organized and how we got there. We will spend time going through key definitions and foundations that set the structure behind our current approach, and we will take a look at the data that has really shaped and informed our framework as well as our outcomes and our measurements. And then finally, we'll forecast what is to come. So our outcomes for our time together today is to really look at transformation of our public safety system and redefining public safety by partnering with community to figure out ways that we can collaborate to invest in the well-being and wellness of Black and American Indian individuals and communities. This work engages partners across systems and community, and we hope you too can support relationships as we move forward critical projects and need your help to bring these partners along on the journey. We expect to come back to you regularly to demonstrate our progress and measurable impacts in our community. And we are putting this information in front of you to set an expectation of what's to come in the future. As we engage in innovation and face political, economic, and social constraints, we need your help to stay focused on long-term change for the most marginalized people in our community. A little bit of background for you. The intent behind this entire effort grew from the last 4+ years of energy in this space. When we think about partnerships we've had with community who have really challenged us to be thinking and understanding our impact on people in our community differently than we have before. Spaces like the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, JDAI, our partnership with the Haywood Burns Institute Learning Community, community members who have been active in the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and many other spaces. These spaces have contributed to a critical mass of leaders in Ramsey County who are ready to try new and innovative work in this space. We have started plenty of committees and work groups to try ideas and to transform our public safety system. We quickly realized that in order for these ideas to work, we needed more strategy to our approach to make these ideas turn into successful projects that really change our system and the impacts felt by our community members. Our work showed up, our community showed up at all of these workshops and committees we put forward, but consistently challenged us to be more intentional before we brought them to the table and to make sure that as a system we were ready to authentically hear the feedback that they had with us and to authentically engage in a partnership of moving initiatives forward. As we continue to think through the types of system transformation we collaboratively designed, we were challenged to think through how we could build stronger connection between health and wellness and safety and justice service teams. This work is really about redesigning our investment of public resources into well-being of communities we serve and not simply relying on reform tactics that are reducing harm. Many of the leaders that were at thought tables through the Burns Learning community started to come together regularly to start to plan how we might better organize this work so that it led to successful changes in our community. This led to the development of what you will see in the upcoming slides, as well as packaged within our Putting Wellbeing and Community at the Center of Justice Transformation Strategic Priority, which was recently released on our public-facing website. So the purpose of this framework that we have created is really to drive us towards a 5-year strategic plan around public safety transformation. This future-oriented planning helps us to set a much more strategic approach to the work we do, prioritizing our efforts so that the projects that we support have what they need to successfully meet the finish line and to meet the outcomes that us and our community are co-designing together. Additionally, this framework helps us to make sure that we're staying focused on the projects and the initiatives that are going to most drive us forward to the long-term outcomes that we'll be talking about in a bit. And with that, I will hand it over to Deputy County Manager Williams.
Thank you, Jen. Madam Chair, Commissioners, we're going to talk a lot. We're going to use the term throughout this presentation and throughout our work, public safety system. And, it's that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. You can think of it very narrowly as the first responders and maybe the 911 system that deploys the first responder, or you can think of it much more broadly from the 911 call all the way through adjudication and even serving time in the correctional facility. We are, for this work and for this presentation, for going forward, really talking about public safety system in the broadest possible context. So including everything from 911 all the way through pretrial services, the court system, the public defenders, community corrections. Next slide, please. Jen mentioned the Burns Institute learning community. That I can't remember how many years we've been part of that. It's been several years. It's been a great experience. It's been very important for our work in the county. It's been important to me personally as well as professionally in my own development. And I will always appreciate that experience together with my colleagues and the great folks at Burns Institute. They came to us when we started this learning community experience with what they call the 4 conundrums. And those are on the screen right now. Racism is both embedded within and a byproduct of the public safety system. And we see that in our statistics. When we look at our data and wherever possible, we look at our data in a disaggregated form so we can see where the disparities are. And the racial disparities in our data is striking, it's persistent, it's stubborn, it's alarming. And it's going to take more than just tweaking to fix that. Which leads us to, but it's not all about public safety, which takes us to the second conundrum. Disinvestment in communities is a structural issue which leads to criminalization and cannot be addressed by the public safety system. So it's not all about the public safety system. It's about the underlying structure, and which leads us to, as we look at solutions, it's not all about how do we tweak the public safety system. Where do we add our resources? It's not just about public safety. It's not just about doing more of the same. It's not just about focusing on increasing penalties. It's much more complex than that, which leads us to number 3. Responding to the complex needs of our communities requires government to be structured to provide flexible cross-sector responses. This has been a challenge for us historically, but I'm happy to say this is an area where we've made a lot of progress and where we're poised to respond in a very different way. The conversations that are coming out of this restructuring are very different in the last several years, and is really why we're here today. That's really what this presentation is about. We've been having these conversations, and part of that struggle has been what are we doing? How are we going to move this work forward? How are we going to work differently? What does a cross-sector response look like, and how do we set our priorities, and what drives our work? Those conversations, which have been going on, I would say most intensively for about the last year and a half with a lot of the folks that are presenting today, have really shaped this presentation, have shaped this framework, if you will, going forward. Not just people in this room, but as we've engaged our departments, we've engaged our partners in the public safety system. And then number 4 is, in order to create effective, innovative solutions, elected and appointed officials must share power with each other and communities most harmed by the systems for which we intend to build solutions. And we've been learning how to do that through that. We hear about co-design, and that's where the co-design comes from. As we're engaging with communities that have been traditionally impacted, we're learning to not only just include them, and not only hear them and being engage with them authentically in the spaces and these tables, but really include them in the design process, and not just at some random point along the way or towards the end when we think we've got it all figured out, but from the very beginning, when we decide, hey, we want to do something different, we want to take a different approach. Join us at the beginning of this journey and help us through the whole process. One of the groups that we work with a lot has a great saying that I love: nothing about us without us. And I think that's just a fantastic approach. In terms of continuing on the foundations piece, systems, next slide, please. So then we talk about what's the difference between transformation of systems and reform of systems, because that's a very important distinction. And it really informs us in terms of how we prioritize what we're doing going forward, and prioritize not only our resources but also our time and attention. Transformation is a process which is comprehensive and inclusive of the entire system. Again, that's why, as we talk about the public safety system, we want to look at it and think of it in the broadest possible context. We engage most disparately harmed communities to cooperatively reimagine purpose, challenges expectations and mandates to deconstruct and reconstruct institutions, addresses assumptions and confronts past and present harms. This is really important, especially when we're authentically engaging with community, to acknowledge the harms that systems have caused in the past and may continue to cause. And as system leaders, be willing to acknowledge that harm in the spaces where we're engaging with community. That has been, it's very important. It's something that, I've had to learn, and I find that the better I get at it, the more authentic that engagement becomes, and the more effective that we can work together with community to do transformational work. Transformation recognizes system and community interconnectivity to eliminate harm and increase well-being investments in the most marginalized communities. And then finally, transformation results in new definitions of structures and institutions, new and different operations and outcomes, as well as converging proximity across system and community. Converging proximity, that's about the system leaders and the system practitioners engaging and being closer to the folks that we're trying to help, the folks they're experts, the experts in the community at how to do this, and not just, we're the experts. We'll tell you how it's supposed to be done, and we'll show you what we're going to do when we've got all the plans figured out. Versus sitting at the table, sitting at the same room, sharing meals together. In the evenings, when at times so that it's convenient for them. So we're really engaging authentically. I'll lean in here a little bit. And so that's the so what. System transformation versus reform. And Kathy's going to talk about reform here. But as we move forward and as we get towards the end of the presentation and we talk about, okay, what next? What's the so what, okay? It's about prioritization. It's about where do we put our resources? Where do we put our funding? Where do we put our time? Where do we put our attention? Because there's not enough of all of that to chase every great idea that's out there, because there are so many great ideas out there. And we could spend more time than we'll ever have chasing all of them down, but we have to focus and we have to prioritize. So how do we do that? We ask these questions. What about this idea of system transformation versus reform? And so I'll have Kathy talk about the reform piece.
Thanks, Scott. And as Scott said, we think it's important to differentiate the transformation work from the reform work. Both things are happening across the county system, and both are important. Systems transformation, though, is not system reform. And like I said, both are important and will take place simultaneously. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. What we want to think about here is the system reform is about improving our progress on outcomes that already exist, while system transformation changes the outcomes we are working towards through redefining purpose and expectations. System reform allows us to reach the original intent of our current systems more efficiently. When we think about our commitment to racial equity, as Scott was talking about, and we recognize the institutional racism that's embedded within the design of our government systems, system transformation forces us to lead with racial equity in a more holistic way. To get a little bit more into some examples of what reform looks like here in our system, this past February, you may recall our Community Corrections Department presented progress with reducing revocations work. They detailed a history of reform work that's dating back to 2005 with the work that many of you have been involved in with the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. They talked about the closure of BTT, reduction of fees for people held at Ramsey County Correctional Facility, and even the reduction of people being held in the correctional facility. Implementation of cognitive behavior therapy, and most recently, the Reducing Revocations Challenge work that reduces the harm and overpunishment caused by the technical violations, where, as we all know, harm and contribute to the continued mass incarceration of Black and brown people in our community. This is reform work, and it's important work. Both reform and transformation take intentionality. System transformation is hard, and it takes time. It requires a great deal of resources and engages quite a few partners. Community is brought in, as you've heard, as Jen's been talking and Scott's been talking, in as a design partner and not just an advisor for our already thought out process. As you've heard in other workshops, including the County Attorney's Reinvesting in Youth workshop on June 7th, system transformation is building shared power through a co-designing of the solutions, shared decision-making, shared system, and community response. You heard Ms. Brenda Burnside, Dr. Raj, Dr. Tamara Madison, and Ms. Juliette Mitchell talk about the importance of community in that shared process. Next slide, please. I think you're on the right slide. In order to operationalize the foundations and values and drive the proposed outcomes, transformation to community well-being has been organized into 4 categories. We created this organization in order to clarify what part of the system we are investing in. The first category is prevention, which is what happens before we see the crisis. Oftentimes, it's hard to evaluate prevention as it's the absence of injury, disease, and death, and it's an abundance of health and well-being. Public health and social services, family and child well-being programs fit well here. Next is intervention. This is where practitioners and professionals are involved during the point of crisis. Healing Streets model and embedded social workers within a police and fire co-design model fit well here. In the shallow end, we have diversion programs to avoid charges, and in the deep end comes after placement in facility or after court decisions. There is genuine interest in moving us upstream as possible, moving us as upstream as possible. However, each one of these components of the system needs attention and investment. If we commit to this framework and start to see less usage of our deep end and shallow end of the system, more and more resources will be focused on intervention and prevention projects. In addition to transferring resources, it's important to also invest more directly into prevention and intervention work. This gradual transition of resources over time will naturally allow for the reshaping of the public safety system, which will offer more resources available to invest in the well-being of Black and American Indian communities, and so less so in the system built to punish people. It's important that we continue to evaluate how we use resources and the effectiveness of those resources in order to better understand if they are providing the intended outcome shared by community and systems. We will need to commit to intentional evaluation and Ramsey County focused research in order to dismantle and deconstruct the interconnectedness behind resources that fund shallow and deep end programs and services. Some of this work is happening right now with the TST work and the focus on child welfare system. As we move into the next slide, I'll hand it over to Chris Coulter from Community Corrections to share data that helped us to understand the system transformation work that must be accomplished moving forward.
Hey there. So we'll take a look at the context for this work, and I'll show you a couple of the many data points that we can look at. So we'll start with Ramsey County arrest data and looking at arrests of adults in 2020. We see here that Black adults were significantly overrepresented among arrests. So they were 12% of the population in 2020, but 43% of adults arrested. Taking a look at youth arrests, same thing. Black youth were significantly overrepresented among arrests in 2020. They were 22% of the youth population, but 66% of those arrested. We'll take a look at the average daily population at the Ramsey County Correctional Facility in 2021. And Black adults were 43% of the average daily population. And then lastly, taking a look at youth out-of-home placements. About half of all youth placed outside their homes in 2021 were Black.
So the key data points that Chris just highlighted, well, she just highlighted a few of the data points. There are many decision points and data points in our public safety system. She talked about arrest data, which we can kind of think of as front-end data, a front-end decision point. She also highlighted the incarceration data and out-of-home placement data, which you can think of as more back-end or deep-end data. Both this front-end and back-end data highlight the disproportionate impact for our Black and American Indian individuals. And this type of data is the data that has helped inform this transformational framework. It also is data that gives us context for where we are now and helps benchmark and helps us think about where we are moving in the future. And it also helps us think about outcomes. What are the long-term changes we want to see for our communities? And when embarking on work like this that is strategic, systematic, long-term, and resource-intensive, it's really important to measure progress and to be able to talk about and show moving in the direction that we want to move. So on this slide, you can see 4 key outcomes that have been developed for this point, for this transformative work. 3 of the 4 outcomes focus on Black and American Indian individuals specifically because they have been most negatively impacted by our current public safety system. And under each of these outcomes, you will see a couple potential measures. And you can kind of think of measures as data points or information that help us gauge, are we making progress in these particular areas? And I want to say potential measures at this point because there are a lot of different ways to measure outcomes. And I think it's really important as we continue this work to be creative and think of all the different ways we might want to measure progress. So these are just some examples, and I just want to point out a few things before I hand it over to Jen, who will talk more in depth about each specific outcome. But certain outcomes, like if you look at number 2, less Black and American Indian people incarcerated, that's a pretty concrete outcome, and there are some tangible measures that we have that can help us gauge progress, such as the number of at the adult detention center by race. We could look at who's in the juvenile detention center by race, or the Ramsey County Correctional Facility. We might also look at Ramsey County residents who are in prison by race. So again, there are other potential measures. The first outcome, less Black and American Indian people impacted by the justice system is a pretty, it's a big idea and big concept. There are probably many ways to measure this, and I think we're going to need to work on how we measure this. Right now, we have one example of arrests. We know we have that data. It's something that tells us something. But I think, too, as we move forward in this work, we need to think of other potential measures that demonstrate whether we are impacting that first outcome. So, Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Leah. So as Leah was framing up, these are the 4 kind of outcomes and measures that we're looking at with all of our justice transformation work and the initiatives that fall within them. And so really the gist of it is that engagement with the public safety system creates barriers which reinforce structural and institutional racism. And these access barriers limit opportunities for employment, housing, education, mobility, and credit, as well as strains or dismantles family and community structures. In order to eliminate the barriers to community development, we need to make movement on each of these outcomes. As Chris and Leah were outlining for us, Black and American Indian communities are disproportionately impacted by our current system, which is why in all of our strategic work moving forward, we should be centering those communities and to be really partnering and co-designing this work alongside of them. So with this first outcome, less Black and American Indian people impacted by the justice system is really key because engagement with the public safety system presents a net harm to individuals and their respective community. Consequences for engagement are costly to government systems and impede community development. Reducing harmful system investments and engagements within Black and American Indian populations opens spaces for well-being and developmental contributions. Less Black and American Indian people incarcerated. Incarceration not only extracts resources and people from Black and American Indian communities, but it perpetuates their slavery through the 13th Amendment and returns individuals to the community with more barriers than opportunities for success. Inevitably, some proportion of the population will engage with the public safety system. This outcome demonstrates the effectiveness of efforts to divert or limit their progression through a system designed to induce harm. Less Black and American Indian people financially obligated to the public safety system. Financial obligations through fines, fees, and other costs imposed on these communities directly extract wealth from Black and American Indian communities and offer opportunities to add debts to individual households. Eliminating these barriers offers more space for these communities to experience much-needed financial development and promote their financial sustainability. And then crime reduction. This framework that we're talking with you today about really hypothesizes that if we invest less in creating barriers and invest more in wellness and community-centered initiatives, that we will see crime rates reduce over time. This entire framework is packaged into our strategic priority. Within the strategic priority, we will partner with key system and community leadership to select transformation projects for our 5-year strategic plan. So you might be asking, how will these initiatives be selected? They'll really be looking at some criteria that Scott was mentioning a bit earlier, but we'll be looking at how far will this initiative move the needle? How many Black and American Indian households will be impacted by this transformation initiative, and when will the community start experiencing that impact? How are we partnering with community? Does this specific project follow our definition of co-design, and do we have the resources to authentically listen to community and to engage in a co-design process? How much is this in alignment with transformation? Scott was laying out our definition of transformation, so we'd look at each initiative and see how in line with that definition it is. And how sustainable is this work? Do we have the resources of people, money, commitment, buy-in, political capital to really move this work forward and to advance it? So within this framework, projects may be existing or planned for the future. Existing projects and initiatives would have an opportunity to re-envision their work to better align with our system transformation framework. We'll be regularly reporting on the outcomes that Leah was laying out for us through the open data portal so that we can be tracking our progress in each of those 4 key areas. And there'll be forthcoming board workshops on key public safety transformation projects and initiatives, including the workshop that many of us will be back in front of you for next week with our Appropriate Responses initiative. So with that, I hope that you all are as excited about moving this work forward as we are. It's been a pleasure to share all of the work that's gone into this by many people in this space, as well as Zachary Hilton, who's no longer with the county, but did a lot of work moving this forward. And with that, we stand for questions and engagement of how we can collectively move this work forward.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to our county manager for some remarks.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to the entire team here for the team presentation. Sometimes a tight presentation where we're in process along the way maybe doesn't seem like it took 100+ hours to get to the place that we're at, but I mean, I can just say from the involvement I've had with just a few of the folks sitting around here on this, there's a ton of thought and deep soul searching and looking at our work to date and listening and reflecting that goes into much of what we start with. Just a few framing pieces I wanted to add at the end, hopefully that add to what's here. On the piece around what we're choosing to highlight and want to consistently measure, Jen walked through that just a second ago. I think it's important that, particularly in the justice system, at the deepest ends, the idea that we all do better when we all do better doesn't actually apply exactly the same all the time here. What we realize is those most harmed, when they do better, we all do better. But there is a way where it's a system that can prove very difficult to change the underlying dynamics. And some of this data here today shows that. And we need to get to a place where we recognize that by measuring where we are often seeing the worst outcomes, we know that everyone in our community along the spectrum will ultimately improve. You build better systems. Finding ways to work with people in community whenever possible benefits everybody. But we know that some areas are more disproportionately impacted than others. And I appreciate that these measures shine a light on that. We've seen progress in areas where we've been working in our justice system already in these spaces. This first step is truly a conversation around priorities that we wanted to have with the board that builds on the strategic plan that you've all supported and continued to push forward. And it felt like a good check-in moment before we become more tangible. When we become more tangible, everyone says, well, why did this fall into this category or that category, without ever laying out a foundational framework for how we're trying to bring a certain level of consistency and thought to our work. And there's been many conversations, many that involve all of you and others not at the table, where people have said, how are we weighing the relative efforts happening across justice system reform with health and wellness work and child welfare? How does this come together under a frame? And when Commissioner Carter was chair, this was like a weekly standing topic, I think, on many of our agendas, and for good reason. And we've been working to try to answer that question. I don't mean to say that today's work answers that question fully, but it's a methodical step forward to try to answer those questions more smartly in a way that works. One of the things we have seen is, as we talk about transformational work and we have reform work happening, and I appreciate Deputy County Manager Hadeen walking through both, people all want to say, but I'm doing transformational work. And thinking that that's good and reform work somehow is less good. And I would posit from sitting here that you need to both do important reform work to systems that exist and are a part of what we do, while also always transforming systems in the right spaces to change how the work actually interacts. And we want to get away from the idea that one's good and one's less good. Both are good and both are important. And we want to see continued reform to probation, for example, while asking questions around when is probation appropriate and how do you best do it, which would fall into the transformational category. So finally, we'll absolutely be back. We just thought it very important to check in here today with a tight presentation. I'm impressed they were able to get it down to as few slides as they did based on where we started. And just deep gratitude to Jen and Zachary, who has moved on now to his PhD program. I thought we had him for one more week here today. I misspoke earlier. But they're the ones who went around to every initiative and effort going on here in the county and sat down and said, what's working, what's not, what are you frustrated about? And that opens up a whole thing when you do that across a wide array of stakeholders and community members and partners. And then how do you sift through that? And this team here, through the data side and the strategy and leadership side, has really done that. We look forward to kind of hearing some of what you think as we move forward. And thank you for letting me just provide one more overlay on top.
That's great. Thank you, County Manager, and thank you all for all of your comments. So I've got Commissioner Reinhardt and then Commissioner Carter.
Actually, Commissioner Carter was first.
Commissioner Carter first, sorry. Thank you.
And thank you. I am jumping out of my seat. It is so impressive to see the work that has been put together and presented jointly by all of you. And of course, the question that I asked the county manager over the year 2021 was, how come this is taking so long? And I do see, it's very, very clear, the work that it has taken to invest deeply in understanding the initiatives that are in process across the county, and even more so, how they work together to address the foundations or the conundrums, if you will, that we've been talking about in this county with Burns Institute for so long, and how, in fact, they will, along each of those platforms, starting with prevention, and shallow end is a new one for me, including intervention and shallow end and deep end, how they will work together to get us to the better outcomes that we're looking for. So first of all, I just have to really thank you for not shying away from this deep work that you've been doing together, based upon those focused areas of work and priorities that we've been investing in with our community. This is so very important. And it seems as though you put it into such a nice presentation that it may not be clear how much work was done, as the county manager has said, or how much work yet needs to be done. It is a beginning, but it's a beginning that knits the work together so well. Undoubtedly, you'll come back and you'll refine and you'll continue this work, but so well that it begins to make sense. Why our organization and structure is as it is, and how, in fact, it impacts our ability to do this work together, because it does. It gives us opportunity that we haven't had in the past and helps us to create those roadways to get to where we want to be. I did note that, and again, thank you for the framing in the way that you did, bringing us through the background and taking us through reform and transformation and helping us understand the data and the outcomes we're seeking. I did note that as Kathy, you were talking on the organization slide, and each of the areas involved their descriptive statement. In the shallow end, which again is a new term for me, in the shallow end, in purpose, it did not state the reduction of out-of-home placement. And that was missing glaringly for me, although as you went through the balance of the slides, it was clear. I wonder if in that place, if we're using that as our foundational organizational structure, if it should have that there. And then, of course, I did see the data as it came through, and it made sense, and I saw it there in the data. And then as you talk about next steps, I think it is so important that that regular reporting is a part of those next steps, and that we find the way to bring to the fore that information that needs to be shared and shared out on our website and shared out in workshops and things of that sort, but transparent for community to continue to understand. As we have been in this uptick in certain crimes over the past couple of years during pandemic, and as we continue in this endemic period, we've seen some confusion around data, and some inflammation, actually, of the narrative about crime. Certainly there's upticks in areas of crime. But if we can be clear about data, not just on our outcomes for, i.e., reducing detention, but also as it relates to the volume of crime, and the trends and circumstances and who's committing crime, it can be very, very helpful. One area that I think deserves particular attention is this place where, and in your last outcome you capture it, it's important to know that as we reduce justice involved, we're also reducing crime. So to have those two juxtaposed against each other is important. Forgive me for all this talking. But also to understand the circumstances around offenses. I have heard it said in the community, Ramsey County, you're doing a great job of keeping kids out of detention. But what about crime? And so it is important that we are able to show those two together. Not to say crime hasn't increased in certain areas, but it has. But to address what the crime is and who's committing it. I am well aware that although we have high levels of incarceration, for example, of youth of color, that offense data, as compared to other youth, is something we haven't unpacked and understood. It is not necessarily true that in all areas, youth of color offend more. And so as we unpack this data and information and have the ability to share it, regularly share it, and make it transparent, we are going to also have the ability to deconstruct narratives which get us into trouble and which cause misunderstanding of the work that we're doing. Forgive me for not being clearer, but I believe that everyone around this table is aware that the narrative does not always match the actuality that we are addressing and dealing with in our community. I believe that transparent data and information, such as you were talking about sharing on a regular basis, will be extremely helpful to us and to our communities in understanding and working together to address our goals and needs. But thank you for this work.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to tell you that I knew that she couldn't wait.
I know.
And she had her
Wow.
hand up earlier because I could feel her jumping out of
Yes.
her chair. And so I'm so glad that you speak to it so clearly, and it's so important. And this is really, I was going to say exciting, but I think more inspirational as far as what we can do, instead of just taking, and it's, you get things done step by step, so I'm not saying that. But it seems like, because in the past, I think some of this has happened because of the fact that we felt like we needed to kind of leapfrog or something, and we needed to take those steps. We need the data. And I appreciate the fact that this data is succinct and the presentation was as well. But we all know that, as you pointed out, Commissioner Carter, that there's a lot more data that we need to mine in order to figure out, okay, so what does this really mean? The number of youth, the percentage of youth of color being arrested is important data, but it's why. What are those offenses? And how can we use that information to make sure that we're getting the right response to each of these? I do have a question on this. Well, I've got 2 page numbers here, but it's pages, let's see here, 11 and 12 or 13 and 14. It's the overrepresented adults and youth slide.
Okay.
And I notice, and I think it's really important that you put African American and American Indian as an emphasis on what we need to do, because that's what the data shows. But I am curious, and maybe it's about offenses, I'm not sure, but you have, for youth anyhow, the American Indian is 2% of the population and 2% of those incarcerated. And so it dawns on me, and even with, and now on the other side, it's for adults, it's 1% of the population and 2% of the arrests, which is 50%, so that's not insignificant. But I'm wondering how, I mean, it seems to me that you must be doing something that would target what we need to really address within the communities, and that the issues, based on the percentages anyhow, are much more significant with the African Americans. So how are you separating those out? As far as, are you looking at things more on an individual basis as well as the total? I don't know if I'm being clear, but I'm just, why were they lumped together? I guess maybe.
Can you clarify, and I just want to clarify that slides 11 and 12 are of arrests. So it's showing the percent of arrests relative to population. So I just want to clarify that.
Right.
It's slides 13 and 14 that get into incarceration. So slides 11 and 12 are just about arrests. And then can you clarify, what do you mean by lumped together?
Okay, and when you were, okay, where are they? You know, I'm not finding the right slide here right now. As far as the response and the transformation, I thought that there was information that talked about.
Commissioner Reinhardt, can
Yes,
I
thank
see if I got, we spent enough time hanging out where I want to see if I heard you right the first time.
Okay.
if I heard you correct, let me see if I frame it, tell me if not. So you look at the data that you saw, you cited the slides, and then when you go to what I have titled as slide 15, I don't know what number you have in your packet, but the one around key outcomes and potential measures, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can keep going here, I'm on a hot streak. There are the bolded statements at the top, and the bolded statements say less Black and American Indian people impacted by the justice system, right?
Right.
And so was your question, why are we disaggregating by race, but then lumping those two together in the measure? Is that what the question was?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, because there's an and between Black and American Indian, can you do a little bit of clarification here on where you're going?
Thank you for the translation.
Thank you. So I think that, so I have it as slide 15 as well. So the lumping Black and American Indian, I don't think that it's intended that when we show data, we would lump them together. I think just in the talking points, it's to just show that there's going to be a focus on those two populations. But whenever we would look at data, we would disaggregate. We would not put American Indian and Black populations together. So does that help? Okay.
Yes, very much so.
And can I add
Thank you.
one other thing, Commissioner Reinhardt, is these are just two of the data points. A lot of other data points show, at least I know from the correction side, really greater disparities with American Indian numbers compared to population. So when we look at more data points, you'll see more disparities, if that makes sense, with those population. These two slides don't show it quite to the extent as some of our other indicators have, at least in the corrections realm.
And that's actually where I was starting, knowing that there's a lot of other data points, but these were the ones that were here. And the and did kind of, it was like, okay, exactly how is this working? So anyhow, thank you. And thank you again, County Manager, for knowing me as well as you do. Because there is so much to do. And I think really what it comes down to is we've been working on this for a long time, but you've pulled it together. And it means that we can, plan your work and work your plan. And very clearly, this is working the plan. And not that there haven't been things happening, because there have. But this is a real holistic plan on how do we really make changes here. I can tell you that yesterday when we were in the meeting with Congresswoman McCollum and Attorney General Ellison, and listening to the young women that were there talking about their experiences, and they brought up something that I think was really important, and that was that there are pockets of where people feel like the outside world doesn't impact them or shouldn't impact them. You move to a different location and you feel safer. And the fact of the matter is, we need to all look at it, not in pockets, but as a whole, and that's what this does. It says this is all of us. We've got data that separates us out, and that needs to be there, otherwise we can't focus, and we are not going to make progress, which is what this is about. But I do think that to me, it was an interesting insight that these young women, 16 and 17 years old, talked about that. And that really came down to race, is really what it came down to. And let's face it, when talking about some of the transit projects and other things that we have, that's what it's about. And it shows up here. So thank you. This is, it really is inspiring to see what we're going to be able to do, work in this plan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Thank you, Commissioner McDonough.
Yep, thanks, Madam Chair. A couple quick observations, and throughout this progress and journey and work we've done, I think today really drives home to me confidence that we're getting to the meat here, right? It takes a while. I'm with you, Commissioner Carey. But it does take a while, right? Past workshops where we're kind of chewing around the edges, we're maybe walking on eggshells in some ways, or not everybody's aligned in the vision or the work. And, you know, this workshop really demonstrates to me that we are really funneling down to that. And there's a couple of core pieces, you know, that I think are key to this. Jen, you said it in one of your pieces here. We're working with a system that has been designed to induce harm. You know, the conundrum here, racism is both embedded within and a byproduct of the public safety system. You know, and the connection to crime, the reality is, for the most part, this public safety system, and we call it a public safety system, you know, so the general public feels like this is designed to keep you safe, right? Where, for the most part, it's been the tool to perpetuate racism when other tools were taken away. Slavery and Jim Crow laws and the Civil Rights 64 came in, and as we take tools away for society as a whole to perpetuate racism, they continue to find other tools and other ways to do that, and the public safety system became that tool in so many ways. And then, you know, the key here, I think, and you talk about it early on, and you got to focus where you can right now and do the best we can, and we're going to do that. But the fact is, you know, until we really get other systems that are also tools to continue to perpetuate racism in our community, and in particular the education system, because so many of the folks in our system, people of color, African Americans, American Indians, but people in color, we've never given them tools other than force them to use survival skills from the time they were really toddlers. And when that's all you have is survival skills, you have no other skills to participate in society, you're going to end up bumping up against a public safety system that was designed to induce harm, right? And that's where we focused and funneled everybody is to this system, because we have not given and supported and invested in any other tools. So as we do this work, we're going to have to, you know, this is going to have to spread. We're going to have to be supportive of, you know, eliminating the tools of racism throughout our society, and in particular, education, out-of-home child, you know, taking the child out of their home no matter what, and how we manage that. But I really commend the work that you're doing, all of you, within the county here, because we are moving this forward in a way of, you know, you've got the continuum of crisis, the intervention, the prevention, and all the things that we're working on right now to at least eliminate and change the public safety system from being that tool to perpetuate racism, to induce harm, to truly do what public safety needs to do for our community in a way that treats all of us the same. And, you know, racism is designed to treat humanity differently, you know, depending on the color of your skin or your culture. And until we get, you know, a society that treats humanity in a way that all of us are treated equally, and all of us have the same opportunities for prosperity, and all of us have the ability to self-determine, we're going to continue to have to work on these areas. But the public safety system that has been designed to induce harm, and I really appreciate that statement. And we can't say it enough. We can't. We have to get people to recognize, people that will stand on the edge and say, oh, Ramsey County, you're doing great things with our kids, but we got all this other stuff going on in your community, so you got to go back to what you're doing to keep us safe, right? No. Because what we were doing was designed to induce harm for populations in our community. We are no longer going to participate in that. So I appreciate all of your leadership and all the work that all of you have been doing to continuing the push. You know, I as, you know, one of 7, and I'm pretty confident 7 of 7 are strongly supportive of this work as policymakers, and setting that framework that allows, and not only allows, but encourages and pushes our staff to continue to do more in this area. And I hope you feel supported to continue to take take bigger leaps and to continue to peel this back even farther and be more honest with us and the community about the history that we have and the history we have to change moving forward for everybody in our community. So, thank you.
Well said. Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. Did anyone else? So many amazing things have been said. Yes, Commissioner Carver.
You're right, and I'm not going
No, you
to
can't.
interrupt your close, only
No,
to
no.
say that while I am extremely thankful for the work that has been presented by staff, I have to also acknowledge the journey that we as a board have been on and thank this board for such strong, iterated support. You know, there have been times over history where we would not have stood as strongly as we do today. And it is just amazing to see the transformation of a board that has come to a place of great understanding and that does not shy away from, because we have responsibility for the work that we can control, any of that work, because of circumstances that continue to exist in our community. We look at the justice system and we understand its comprehensive links, not from, but to, and between all of the other work that we do and that our community is involved in. And we take responsibility as we think through transforming justice, not just justice system transformation, but the transformation of all of our work, you know, such as illustrated across the board, an example of which would be our economic inclusiveness and competitiveness plan, which focuses on the work that we must do to right the opportunities for people to have other abilities in their lives and not have to come through our justice system. So I just want to say a huge thank you to the Board of Commissioners for all of your support, for the journey we've been on together, and for ending in a space together today where Jim and I can leave at the end of the year and know that we are handing this work off to a team that gets it. Thank you for your leadership, for your example, for the entire country. And I should mention at this point, too, that where youth justice is concerned, Ramsey County continues to be our nation's leader. And we will have the opportunity next week at the National Association of Counties to talk about this transformative work that we've been doing, and together with Annie Casey and other counties to shine a light on that ongoing process of transformation that we're involved in. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Carter, for all of your leadership in this. I say it many times, we are the most amazing board in the country because we do support amazing transformational work like this, and we have the most amazing staff to actually carry all of this out. So just thank you so much. I actually had a kind of a question, a sort of a restatement, because so many amazing things have been already said. But as we look through these slides, and I also was impatient, you know, like, oh, when is this work? You know, how can we do it faster? But it's so important that it is deliberate and thoughtful. And I really appreciate County Manager saying, you know, the phrase, we all do better when we all do better, but it's not true. We all do better when our disadvantaged communities do better. Then we can all do better. And so I was just going to ask if you wanted to highlight a little more, because someone else looking at this PowerPoint is going to say, well, do we want to, you know, lower the, you know, in our goals, and you know, that we have less Black and American Indian, and it's all it is about these disadvantaged communities, and it is where we see the high numbers. But we actually want less people impacted by our justice system. We want less of everyone. But I think it was what you had said before, that when we focus our work on what we have the most disparities in, then we all do better. So if you want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And if anyone else wants to add anything, please jump in. I want to ground this in the practical terms of what we've seen happen in this community over the last 5 years and not theoretically talk about it. Because this question does come up a lot and you get challenged on it. And quite frankly, the data supports the side of where we're going to argue on this.
Exactly, right.
As we have gone through our deep end reform work, one of the areas where you see the most disproportionate impact, or as we have gone through our homelessness work, you do not see a world when you focus on race as a predictive indicator and you focus on those most harmed, you do not see a world where people that were less harmed become more harmed at the expense of others. It's just not what the data shows. As we reduce homelessness, we see disproportionality often decrease based on race if we do our work with a race-focused lens. And then we see the overall number of people who are homeless go down, which is good for the entire community. When we reduced rates at which we were incarcerating young people, what we saw was a reduction across races, but the largest reduction occurred across those who identified as Black. And what is hard about that is you often end up with systems, this was shared by Annie Casey in a workshop with us one time, in which we reached a point where our out-of-home placement numbers were almost only reduced to a population of young Black youth in Ramsey County, which means the white youth, it's not like we grew our incarcerated population of white youth. And so there is this piece where we do know through data and experience that a targeted focus on those most harmed results in benefits to all, but also if you focus on race, can create a reduction that disproportionately benefits those most harmed. I hope that helps, and it's a really important point because it comes up a lot. Did I get, particularly the data folks, is there anything there you want to amend, or is that okay?
I think you did a good job, and I actually just want to confirm, yes, that the average daily population at the correctional facility has been down since 2017, and with out-of-home placements, they've been down as well since 2014, so just to confirm.
I really appreciate you highlighting those, that issue, County Manager, because I think it is important for everyone to understand that, and we can't say it enough, that, you know, the focus, we have the correct focus when it may not, people may want you to focus on everything, but we need to focus on the most important thing to really get those numbers down. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Well, and again, I'm going back to the meeting that we had yesterday. As you can tell, and as Commissioner Modis Castillo and I both said, it was really a powerful roundtable discussion. But talking about, when we talk about criminal activity, the use of guns or other ways or other things that are done, it's not just that somebody chooses to do this, it's the only thing, they're desperate in many cases. They don't have power. They feel like they need to, we all do. We want to have control over our own destiny. And if you don't have the correct tools, if it's the only thing that you see as giving you that power, you're going to act out in that way. So it's going to affect your behavior. It's not about acting out. It's about actions that are taken. And I think it's important for people to understand that. It's not just, we've got so many African-American boys in our system. It's why? Yeah. Why? And that's where we need to make the changes. Because we all want to have that, feel like we have that power and control over ourselves. And if that's the only tool we need to change. That is what it comes down to. And I'm looking at Trista because, again, it was stated very eloquently by the young people there yesterday. But if you wanted to comment on that also, I don't know.
I think you covered it really well.
Okay.
And Commissioner Carter.
I keep having him. One more thing.
No, Commissioner Carter, we welcome all of your comments. We're gonna miss them when you're gone, but we love having you.
As I think about this, certainly the relationship between crime data and the work that we're doing makes sense. As we reduce detention or as we reduce out-of-home placement, we want to know that the outcomes are what we're looking for over time, and that is the reduction in crime, in recidivism, in fact, as we look at young people, particularly our community wants to know that we're doing what works. You know, that there is a foundation that we are employing that says the old way doesn't. You know, there are some creative changes that we are making to address offending differently because we believe that some new applications of services and help can in fact do that. So it's going to be important as we build that data and report out to our community that we think about the ways, the work that we're doing, you know, what is different, and the results. Certainly crime, but also recidivism. You know, that a young person who doesn't necessarily receive the hammer of justice, but may receive a consequence and services, may act differently in the future is very important. So we'll, I hope, I know, be careful about patterning that work of reporting out data and information such that we can show the difference. Yeah. And I just think that's so very important as we build the work forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner Carter. And so I'd like to just open it up for for those of you that presented. Is there something that you'd like to highlight one more time, or is there anything that you want to make sure we take away from this? I'm going to let you comment now. Then I'm going to let Deputy County Manager Hedin and Williams speak, and then if you want to have any more comments. Any further comments? Good.
If they say more, they'll get more questions.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, I just want to make sure, that we've given you.
Oh, great. Since we're here in person earlier, County Manager Connor mentioned that Jen received an award, but since she's in person, I just want to say congratulations again on your award for the National Association of Social Workers. It's a really big deal, and we're really happy for you and just really proud of the work that you've done. And you demonstrated why you received the award, so thank you and congrats.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Mendez-Castillo. Yes, we should have definitely done that at the beginning. So just thank you so much for all of your work. It's ongoing. I feel like this is a commencement. It's like, okay, now we move forward from here. So thank you so much. And with that, the next workshop, or it's at 1:30 as a closed workshop downstairs. So thank you. This workshop is adjourned.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
To you about carbon monoxide and carbon monoxide alarms. Carbon monoxide is a gas that's colorless, tasteless,